there's quite a few people here. We're around the same number of people that we were at the last time, around 40. So it's great to see you all again. And just I obviously we know some of the people in the room, and we've probably worked with you over the years on different kind of climate work. But there's quite a lot of people who I don't recognize, and that's kind of interesting for us who've been in this area for kind of a long time. There's a lot the local authorities are really building, I suppose, their capacity and resources around climate, which is which is great to see. Because for quite a number of years, local authorities, not everybody had climate action officers or community climate action officers in place. So it's just great to see how the sector has evolved over the last number of years. Um, but even having people in place, it's still a huge amount of work, and it's a big task. And the work that you're all doing on a day-to-day basis is, it's obviously significant, but it's obviously we recognize how big a challenge it is, and hopefully some of the stuff that we kind of go through today will help sort of support that. And as I said, today is it's obviously myself and Joanna. And with the last session that we did in November, which seems like a long time ago, but it's not that long ago. Um, it was much more of a presentation webinar. So we just kind of went through kind of aspects of communications, and kind of sharing some of just our own kind of experiences of what we've seen, in terms of how climate communications and also engagement, kind of community and public engagement around climate. And there was a lot of information. And some of it was, some of the kind of the principles and some of the thinking, and again, the idea of the second session is just to get a little bit more practical. And one of the things that, we're very conscious of, and it was something that Joanna actually kind of raised when we were thinking about the feedback in terms of what we heard from the last session, even though the focus is around, communications, a lot of the content that we had, should speak to the climate teams as well as the comms teams. But one of the things I say, Joanna was, sorry, I'm speaking on your behalf, Joanna, here, but one of the things was really around, helping the climate teams to be able to work with communications teams, and that's really what we want to try and get across this morning. We don't expect climate action officers to become, experts in communications, or, to understand all the details of how to run communications campaigns, but it's really about how can the climate teams kind of crystallize what they want to say, and then work with the communications teams to be able to bring that to life and make kind of campaigns and communications happen. But we're also very conscious that not every local authority has a comms team, so we're just trying to make sure that we get enough across to everyone that they feel that they can kind of take something from the last 2 days and start to implement it. So, but what we're going to do is we didn't, again, we're just back after Christmas. We didn't know exactly who was going to be, how many people were going to be here. We had 90 people registered, but we didn't know how many would turn up. So really the kind of the format is it's going to be more interactive in the sense of discussions, and we're going to be posing questions, but it really, we're kind of, the way we see it, we're kind of 40 colleagues, we're 40 peers, and we're going to share as much as we can between each other. So we're going to be using it as an opportunity for people to share kind of what works and what doesn't work, and hear from other local authorities. And some of that will mean we will have to put some people on the spot with some of the questions, but hopefully, people will feel comfortable enough that, everybody in the room is trying to work on the same thing. We have similar challenges, so we just need to be as open as possible and sort of see how we can kind of support each other. So I will have a couple of slides, but as I said, we're not going to be presenting at you for 2 hours. So just to bear that in mind. So I'm just going to share my screen. Uh, and hopefully just if somebody could put a thumbs up just to see that they could, that you can actually see the slides that I'm sharing, just so I know. Yeah, good. And I suppose there's just a few other things. We had a few other reflections just, after the last time. And as I said, what we're trying to do is maybe support the climate teams to be able to inform communications, and how do they take what they want to communicate around the climate action plan, and as I say, work with teams. But we're very, uh clear on our side that there's no one size fits all. Like nothing that we do as a company is kind of like a cookie cutter approach. We don't ever really do exactly the same approach in every situation. We know all local authorities are different in terms of internally within, the size of the organizations, the type of staff, and the kind of the culture within the local authorities. But obviously, every local authority area is different. So really, it's about trying to see what's going to work within your own particular um, local authority area. And so so just try and it's something that we always try to say. It's like it's not a cookie cutter. You need to understand what's going to work within your own context and take the different bits and pieces that will work for you. So hopefully that will come across in the session as we go through it. But also just at the end of it, we want to just leave you with a couple of kind of practical tools that hopefully you can then take and use to start to kind of crystallize what are the kind of things you want to build communications around, and how might you start to understand what types of messages you want to kind of get across around your climate action plan. So we want to go from, I suppose, the a bit of the theory that we shared last time to actually some kind of practical steps to implementing things. So just to give you a sense, of the kind of what we're hoping to cover. That's obviously we're introduction, but we want to give a little bit of a recap because we know we've all just come back after Christmas. We're probably, even those that were there are probably trying to remember what we covered the last time, but we wanted to give a little bit of a recap on some of the things that we covered and some of the things that you said to us during the last session. And just to kind of just to kind of ground us and bring us back in the room. We kind of set some homework for people to do over that, which is very cruel, to do over their Christmas break. But really, what we wanted with that is just for people to haven't been thinking about the communications aspects of their climate action plan. So when you come today, you've at least started to think it through, and you might be in a good position to kind of share with others in terms of what you're seeing is working or not working. We'll then have a quick break, coffee break, and then when we come in after, we're going to look specifically into this whole idea of what are the different approaches to crafting kind of messages around climate. So what is, taking on board some of the broader issues that we raised last time in terms of what works around communications, and we want to work through. We're going to look at sort of three frameworks to see how might you start to kind of craft messages around climate, and we're going to pose questions around what works in your area or what might work with your particular local authority. And then at the end, we'll spend a little bit of time around how to measure and start to at least think about the measuring of the impact of communications and how communication sort of fits within the wider climate action plan. So before we start, and again, it's kind of linking to what I was just sort of saying about, we're aware that some of the people in the room are kind of on climate teams and some of them are on comms teams, and not every climate officer has a comms team to kind of work with. But we just like you just to use the chat box just to say hello, who you're, which local authority you're with, and whether you're working on the climate or communication side. It will just help us to understand, like, who's in the room, and what way we can start to frame some of the questions later on. So we're seeing a lot of the climate team. Environmental awareness, that's great. Great. Wicklow, East Donegal, great. Wicklow, Cavan, Kildare, great. We're kind of all across the country, which is great. So hopefully everybody has the same blue sky that we have in Dublin at the moment. And Joanna, I know my colleague, is in Sligo, and it looks very sunny over there. So that's great. So we kind of, it seems to be the majority is kind of climate people, um, and energy officers. And actually, that's just again, it's just useful for us to know. Who's in the room. And I think just to kind of re-emphasize what we sort of, again, what Joanna was saying is we don't expect the climate officers to become experts in communications, but it's really how are you going to work with your communications team to kind of share what you need and what you want to cover. So I see leash, yeah, no comms team. So that's again, it's kind of just interesting for everybody in the room to just at least be aware of that. So some local authorities don't have a comms team to work with and stuff, and so there's additional challenges for the climate team to kind of get this kind of work underway. Um, so just if I uh, so just to kind of recap, and thanks everyone. Just and keep if you haven't written into the chat, just keep you can keep let us know who you are, where you're from. So just to kind of recap on the last session. So like we covered quite a lot in terms of kind of the principles around communications, what works in the context of climate communications, maybe what doesn't work, some are kind of examples of where communication sort of fits within, I suppose, the delivery of climate action plans, and when are the good times to communicate, when are they better than others, and then the different formats and forms of communication, So we were kind of talking about kind of what we might call, and I know myself and Joanna talk about this a lot, where we might talk about kind of when you're communicating to the public and you're just sending out messages, whereas there's this idea of communicating with, where you're maybe being more collaborative. So we covered quite a lot of, I suppose, different forms and the kind of reasons why you would do communications. But one of the questions that we posed the last time, which again was quite interesting, we were thinking about the kind of national framework around climate communications from the Department of Environment, and there's kind of three areas that they're trying to frame communications around, in terms of communications to empower people to take action, communications to build support for climate action, which is kind of advocacy, and then just the general awareness, enhancing awareness and understanding of climate and climate change and climate action. And it seemed to be that obviously you're covering all of these, but the kind of the balance was really around how do we use communications to empower people to take action. And again, that kind of sets a kind of a direction of the types of communications that you might want to think about. And that you might want to do, and it's really more enabling rather than just informing people about climate, which you still have to do, but again, it was just interesting for us to hear from the people in the room that they were kind of more interested in how do we enable people to take action. And then, like, another question that we asked the group at the time, again, it was very interesting for us. It was just kind of what do you see as the biggest barriers to communications within your own local authority? And one of the things that came out the top was kind of a perceived lack of kind of public interest. And again, this is kind of interesting for us, is because when you look at I saw some of the research from the EPA and the ESRI and other organisations around kind of public attitudes, and what Irish people are thinking around climate action. The kind of the message does seem to be, people are aware that it's an issue. They see it as a kind of significant issue, but they don't know where, or they don't know what to do. They don't know how to take action. So again, there's the stuff that we all need to kind of reflect on, in that, if you're, so maybe like a lack of interest isn't necessarily a lack of concern about climate, but it's a lack of understanding about what can be done and what should be done, and what can be done within the context of the different types of communities, and the obviously we're talking about like things like socioeconomics, or if you're urban and rural, there's different things that you can do. So again, there's a lot of stuff for us to reflect on. That a lack of interest isn't a lack of caring necessarily. So it's just, I think that's important for us to kind of keep an eye on. And so some of the things that we were trying to, we were kind of presenting the last time, just, based on the kind of where we're at now in terms of understanding our public attitudes to climate, is very different to where it was 20 years ago. And, we sort of see, you know, communities and individuals, they are taking climate actions in their day-to-day lives, and really one of the kind of the messages that we were trying to get across is kind of, trying to make climate action kind of normal. It's about everyday life. It's not about some, unusual future that we don't live in yet. It's kind of, and trying to make sure that we're communicating around that. We were also kind of, obviously, with, we would have said it, 10, 15 years ago, we relied a lot on, fear and threat appeals around climate, about, the impending disaster. And we know a lot of that just didn't work, because it kind of demotivated people, and, fear and threat appeals don't necessarily work to enable people to take action. So we were saying part of the communications is around trying to not ignore the negative, but also just trying to kind of maybe emphasize some of the positive aspects of taking climate action, particularly in terms of co-benefits to communities around warmer homes, health, less traffic, things like that. But we did want to really strongly emphasize that you can't shy away from the reality. And like many of you know, we had a phrase kind of greenwashing where people are maybe being slightly less than honest around kind of their kind of green credentials and green actions. But we also sort of said, well, look, there's a thing called what we call green hushing, where people maybe ignore and don't tell the story of actually what's happening within communities. So we sort of said, even though you need to maintain a certain positivity around what people are doing and what people can do, not to shy away from the kind of the challenges, particularly around climate adaptation and kind of vulnerable areas or vulnerable communities within certain locations around the country, and it's been honest with the storytelling around the actual impacts of climate change. And so a lot of what we discussed the last time was around using data, being rigorous around what you're presenting, using kind of relatable and understandable examples of kind of impacts of climate that people can see. So it's not about necessarily about polar bears sitting on a melting iceberg somewhere off in the distance. We also then, when we started to go through the kind of that broader kind of principles around climate action, we sort of said, well, when it comes to kind of communications and engagement, there's just certain things that we always think about, and we sort of see works sometimes in other areas around climate communications, that when we're starting to communicate and we're thinking about the messaging and how we're doing it's really important to connect to people's own values. What we mean by that is what are the things that communities see as important for their community. People have a range of different motivations, and we know just even from the EPA or segmentation of the Irish population in terms of levels of concern, we need to recognize, yeah, people have different motivations. There's things that they would hold, or different communities would see things as being more valuable, or things that they would hold dear. So whether that's the natural environment, whether it's kind of community assets or sports facilities, or the social kind of fabric of their community. So we were saying, when we're communicating climate, one of the approaches is, yeah, to connect the messaging around climate to the things that people actually value, rather than what we assume or what we think they think might be important. And we also sort of said a big part of this, we're trying to move. There is an element of communicating to communities, but we were talking about the idea of opening up conversations, and we know we've had the national kind of climate dialogue and climate conversations. But communications isn't always about, uh, you know, uh, advertising campaigns and billboards and things on the side of buses. It's also those conversations and engagements that are happening at a community level, and they can be as impactful, and sometimes more impactful than maybe sticking a leaflet through everyone's door. So we had a kind of a discussion around that, and again, something that Joanna was kind of, myself and Joanna were discussing after was, when we were discussing it the last time, we know that there's things like citizens' assemblies, or these kind of very involved and very heavy effort kind of participatory processes, but it doesn't always need to be that. It can be the kind of the conversations that you're having, that are being had around kind of community initiatives, whether it's biodiversity or other types of activities. So it's starting to think of these as part of your communications activity, your communications packages, and again, it's just there's a and again, Joanna, so speaking on your behalf, where we've sort of seen in certain situations where you can involve communities in biodiversity initiatives, or kind of community planting or community growing, and then using that as ways to kind of open up discussions around kind of the wider issues to do with climate and stuff. And so, but it's not what we didn't want to give the impression is, this is it. You have to just run very large citizens assemblies all the time. It doesn't need to be that. It's this kind of participatory, engaged approach can be kind of can happen in any location multiple times at different scales.
Sammy, can I
And
just pop in on
please, yeah,
that?
please
I
do.
just wanted to
Yeah, please
share,
do.
just on the previous
Yeah.
one, just a campaign that I worked on a few years ago, just on the participatory as an example. So I was working with, I've been helping clients to build climate communications engagement campaigns. And one campaign I was working on with Trinity College was exactly that. It was the planting of bulbs on campus. So 3,000 bulbs were planted based on the student vote on what they wanted to see. And obviously that didn't change biodiversity on campus fundamentally, but it actually sparked a conversation about biodiversity and about the college's focus on biodiversity and what that means to them. So it was the participatory, the engagement piece was really the hook into just that, into to connecting with people and connecting with the bigger story and those values, and people really feeling that they were part of that story. Sorry, that was
No, no, that's exactly it, Joanna. It's kind of,
yeah,
but we didn't, we like I said, we've been involved in kind of equivalents of citizens' assemblies and these kind of
yeah,
very involved participatory processes, but we just
yeah,
wanted to make sure that we weren't giving you the impression that you need to do something very grand. There's things that are happening all the time within communities, and there are always opportunities for kind of climate communications and climate engagement. And actually, we know that the people respond quite well to conversation and dialogue, and it can
yeah,
kind of bring in groups within the community that maybe aren't going to come to a climate event, or they're not going to say come to a climate workshop. But actually, if there's discussions around, yeah, the kind of the public realm or kind of community growing or whatever, you're bringing different audiences into the discussion. So there's
yeah,
a huge amount of kind of benefit from doing that. And then another thing that we kind of spoke about, which it kind of is connected, Joanne, I think it's like we were kind of talking about, there's like an old, not an old, but there's a kind of a kind of rule of thumb that we always used to have in communications, which is like it's not the message, it's who's telling it. And the idea that actually we know that people trust, what their friends and their family say more than necessarily government communications, for good or for bad. But regardless of whatever their friends and family are saying, people tend to kind of trust that a little bit more. And we know that in kind of the whole area of behavior change, we're heavily influenced by what other people do. So again, this idea of using communications in a way to show what other people within the community are doing, and it's this what's the kind of the social norm around, whether it's, around kind of taking climate action, and it's trying to use kind of storytelling approaches to make people aware what other people within their community are doing. And there's lots of examples of, when we were talking about it the last time, there's lots of examples of how that can inform campaigns. And there's been kind of backup evaluation research showing actually, how people are kind of influenced by knowing what others in their community are doing. And then the other thing, which is kind of, again, is kind of quite linked to this, we kind of talked about the idea of kind of, storytelling, so again, a kind of a rule of thumb that we always had is, people don't remember statistics, they remember stories. But the idea that actually kind of telling stories around kind of climate action or, climate change, and kind of connecting to people on a more an emotional level rather than a purely rational, data-driven, statistical on a statistical level, can be more impactful around climate. So these there's elements of how these bits kind of fit together, and we're going to kind of go through these. We're going to go through these in a little bit more detail this morning. Um, so one of the things that we did ask when I set aside the homework, and we're not going to pick on people, and we're not going to run an exam and give you grades, but really the purpose of the kind of the homework was just so you would be thinking about all the stuff that we spoke about in November, and bringing some of that thinking into the conversation today. And what we kind of asked people was just to have a look at how you're currently doing communications around climate, within your team, or working with your climate coordinators or your communications team. Look at some of the kind of audience. So we kind of talked in the previous session, we talked about the different kind of segmentation. There's the national stuff done by the EPA in terms of the different, segmenting the population into different levels of concern around climate and the receptiveness to different kind of messages. And we just wanted to start to think through what would that might look like at your own local authority level. And then we sort of said, well, look, could you just come up with maybe 2 or 3 kind of actions that you think would address, specific communication challenges for you throughout 2025? Now, we'll come through to these in a second. So we didn't expect you to produce a full plan, but at least we wanted you to be thinking about what we're kind of talking about today. Before you arrived this morning. So just to kind of open up the discussion a little bit. So as I said, we might be putting a couple of people on the spot, but we wanted to just pose a couple of questions around the homework, and we want you to share it. We'll drop the link in the chat now in a second, but we want you to I'll just drop it in there now. But we just wanted to ask we have 3 questions that we want to ask you relating to your homework. And the first one is very broad. It's a bit more kind of creative, but we just wanted to get a sense of how you're feeling about your climate action plan and your communications. So if you click through on the link, or if you're on your phone and you're looking at a big screen, there's a QR code which you can scan, and it'll just bring you to a form that has just has 1 question. And we want, again, this is just to kind of get a sense of the feeling or the temperature and how people are feeling around the climate action plan. So what kind of initial words or phrases come to mind when you're thinking about your own climate action plan and how you might be thinking about communications? Or you might be wanting to think about your own climate action plan, but more climate communications in general. So we just want to get a sense of how people are feeling and at the moment. So I'll just give you like a minute or so just to and then I'll share it on my screen. Is anybody not able to click on the link, or is anybody do they need to access in a different way? You're very quiet.
I think people are able to click the link.
So one second, tech issues. Okay, difficult. Okay, difficult literature. So obviously, 2 people have said difficult, which is this is probably people who don't have communications team in place. Anybody else want to?
Is it just
But
the
it can
first
be
question?
anything.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Is it just the first question we've to answer, or do we have to answer them all?
No, just answer the first question. Sorry.
Okay.
Who was that? Was that Laura? Was it?
Sorry, yeah, that's Laura. Yeah.
Hi, Laura. Jumping ahead. Okay, so it's interesting. So some of the things that are kind of coming through that obviously difficult literature, complicated technical language, stuff to do with awareness. Again, it's kind of interesting. I'll just give it another second.
So
Did
even
you
if
fill
it's
it out,
not
Laura?
climate communication, it can be anything about climate action plan, like any
Yeah.
words.
Right. So can I ask, without, I'm not going to put you on the spot, Laura, but if one of the people who maybe said either difficult literature or difficult or technical language, just somebody who answered that question, do they maybe want to explain what they were thinking? Obviously, we can interpret what you're saying, but is there somebody who gave that answer and wants to say overwhelming number of actions? That's a really important point, Julie. Sorry, that's something that we're constantly trying to work against, is having too many actions because it's overwhelming. But sorry, just somebody who said answered difficult. Do you want to maybe explain what you meant?
Can I come in? But it's nothing to do with that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's just when I put in my response, it's not showing here, and I don't know.
Okay. So it's probably a tech thing. So maybe if you do kind of click through and then save.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, mine only appeared up after I answered all the questions. When I hit save, that's when my first answer appeared up.
Good to know. No, that's useful to know. So we'll probably just use the chat box for the next question. So that's it's like technology is never. So, but does somebody who said difficult want to maybe explain? I mean, you're all amongst friends here.
Yeah, I don't mind just mentioning my one. It was a difficulty.
Karen, yeah.
Yeah, hi. So I'm with Laois County Council, and
Yeah.
I suppose one of the things um I've been struggling with, and we've heard it from the people I'm out speaking to as community climate action officer, is the relevance of this issue to them. So I know there's phrases like meeting people where they're at, and I know we did go through it in even your first communication session quite a bit, but it's the real world experience of trying to meet people where they're at, especially when you're on the hoof and you're maybe coming up with a kind of a shutdown comment from somebody of, I'm not interested in that, that's not my thing. Um,
Yeah.
Again, I know you spoke a little bit about the backlash almost against the individual actions, and people are saying that's for somebody else to work on. It's for big businesses and people who can make an impact in governments. It's not for me to do anything on. So
Yeah.
that's a real issue that's making the communication difficult,
Yeah.
challenging.
No, I mean,
Mm.
there's obviously a few things there, and like one of the things that there's quite often it's like when you're doing kind of communications, it's the loudest voices are the ones who maybe feel that they have something to lose or that they're not entirely interested, and it's trying to understand how do you then maybe target the kind of different groups. And so one of the discussions that we had, say, around the the EPA segmentation, where they sort of say, well, look, there's different levels of concern, and so some of the choices that we might make is there's a small cohort who are not interested and are not going to be shifted and are not going to be changed and are probably never going you're probably never going to convince them otherwise. And so the idea would be, do you then start to focus maybe those that are in the middle that have a certain level of concern and maybe are kind of more receptive to change, and start to try and target and work kind of work with those groups. And are there kind of, can you use that segmentation kind of group to look at your own local authority area, and other specific groups that you kind of want to want to work with? Lisa, sorry, I just see your hand up there. Lisa, you had your hand up. Or it's gone back down.
Sorry, I've been talking away on mute. Yeah, no, I just wanted to add to your point that when just working in this role, that everyone has a value for the environment. So whether they're eating food or they go for a cycle or they like sailing or they might like to go on a holiday, everything is to do with nature, and you just have to get to know people to find out where their value is, what it lies in. And it might be financial, which is fine because we all pay bills for heating. So, everyone wants to save, but that's kind of a good way to get in, because I find that some people are quite contradictory. They might not be, into nature, but at the same time, they love going to the seaside, and they're not going to like a dirty beach. So it's just digging down and kind of using that value that they have to get them to do a bit more passion and to do a bit more action on whatever you might do. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
That's a really. I'm going to come back to you, Karen, just because I think that's kind of one kind of like strategy or approach to kind of, because sometimes within communications and in public engagement and public consultation, usually the way we kind of frame questions, we're trying to find opposing groups. So there's kind of ways of asking questions of the community to say, do you like this or do you not like this? Yes, no, and it's kind of binary, and we break people off into groups. Whereas there are kind of other approaches which are trying to find what are the kind of things that people have a common interest and a common interest in. So, for example, Lisa's there talking about, like, most people like going to the beach, but they don't want a beach that's covered in litter and dog poo and whatever. And then you say, okay, the thing that you have, you might think differently around climate, but you have a shared interest. What are the things that how can we kind of engage and find ways of working together around the thing that we find kind of, we both find important, or the entire group finds important, and the specific kind of consultation and kind of engagement kind of tools to do that. But Karen, what Lisa was sort of saying is, has there been any of that kind of, do you find the opportunity, or do you have the opportunity to engage with people on any, do you have like the time to do it, or do you have the kind of opportunity to engage people further than just say sending out a social media post? Or
Yeah.
again, I'd just be interested
I'm
to
very
hear.
lucky, actually. Yeah, being community climate action officer, I'm out there with groups. I'm out there meeting people
Yeah.
and speaking with people and trying to support them making applications to get funding for climate action projects. So I'm actually really lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I suppose it's just weaving in the outcomes I'm sort of promoting with what people actually want to do themselves, and it's just it's a challenge, but you know, it's a good challenge. It's great when it works, when you find that common ground, but yeah, it can sometimes, when you're being shut down and there's no common ground coming forth from whoever you might be speaking to, it can be a challenge to weave in
Yeah.
the environmental and the climate with what other people are actually concerned about. They can take, you know, sometimes I don't have the time. It's not appropriate for me to be convincing them on what they should be spending their time or money on.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's just a matter of opening up a conversation.
Yeah. No, and lots of empathy to that, if you're when you're actually out meeting kind of communities. And it could be like your that's what I was saying at the start, your job is quite, you know, it's great that we have climate action officers and community climate action officers in place, but it's not to underestimate the scale of the kind of the challenge, because in some respects local authorities are kind of at the, you know, kind of at the front line of kind of climate action, and there's a lot of expectation on local authorities kind of achieving a lot at a local level. So it can be a bit over, as well as like, and I think it kind of, Lisa was kind of touching on it as well, as kind of like sometimes we talk about like root cause analysis. This is very kind of, but you're kind of like, sometimes why people might be saying opposing or being negative about something that you're trying to do isn't necessarily the issue that you're actually dealing with. It could be, you know, kind of opposition to, you know, a project or infrastructure or something in place. Quite often it's connected to something else that's happening within the community, and it's trying to give yourself, it can be very difficult personally when you're kind of being, you know, effectively being targeted, or you feel like you're being kind of trying to deal with that negativity. But actually quite often it's like giving yourself the time and the space, and actually quite often they're raising an issue because of something else that may, you know, that may be happening elsewhere. So I'm just conscious, I can see hands coming up there. So and just Julie,
Can I just ask on that?
Oh,
Sorry,
yeah.
I just need, this has been recorded, and I guess I was kind of saying that this, I'm not
Yeah.
sure those comments should go public, so I'm
No,
sorry.
I'm happy. Like, sorry, Sukanya, I know you sort of said recording. If people would feel that it'd be more comfortable, kind of discussing, because this is what we're trying to kind of share amongst the kind of ourselves. If you're kind of happy for it not to be recorded,
I can edit it out. I can edit it out. So don't worry about it.
yeah. So we'll discuss it. We'll discuss it at the end then. So like, because I think the idea would be, you know, the previous session was like a webinar, so that's, you know, we just kind of spoke at you. Do you know what I mean? So I think that's easy to share. Whereas this is kind of, yeah. We will discuss it at the end, and maybe I'll obviously speak to Sukanya. We might either edit it out or we don't share the recording. So that just to say that. So Julie, I
just wanted to add that I do have to, for project purpose, I do have to share one recording just as a proof, but I can cut things out of it. So don't worry about it. We can discuss that bilaterally as well, Laura. So don't worry about it. Yeah.
We often talk about Chatham House rules where nothing leaves the room. But so sorry, Julie, just did you wanted to come in there? Just
yeah,
and then
third time lucky,
Lisa,
Simon.
and I can see Ralph as well. So just
Thanks. No, I also work as Community Climate Action Officer, but it's not, and in that role that I've experienced this, in my sort of spare time, I also work as a community leader in a voluntary capacity, and I would have come up against very staunch, you know, climate denier in the community who is also another community leader and would have a very, very strong following. And that was it, that was and is extremely challenging. So I took the view, when you asked earlier, did you just kind of leave it? I took the long play on it. So I've let it lie. I'm not going to go head to head with him because sometimes when we talk about personalities and games people play, I figure that if I lock horns with him at the early stage, it just becomes a thing about a victory. And one of us will lie on the floor bleeding and the other one will walk away, with a cut throat. Sorry, with a trophy. And so I just figured, no, I'm just going to leave it for a bit and wait until he needs something from me, and kind of be a bit more strategic that way, rather than sort of continuing to beat my climate drum or beat my environment drum, because I know it's just not going to go anywhere. That's the approach I took. So I think it does kind of align with what Laura was saying earlier about, the game.
I was going to
And
say,
if you recognize early
yeah.
enough, I don't want to use the word opponent, but your adversary or your the other side, if you recognize early enough where they're coming from, I think that helps you a little bit in sort of maybe protecting yourself into the future a bit, and also protecting your argument or your own actions. One more thing, long game,
of
big
course,
picture.
yeah.
Long game and big picture. So I mean,
Yeah.
the potential here was that he was in one subgroup of the community and I was in another, and the potential was that the whole community would be split. So you just have to kind of go up to 30,000 feet and look down and go, actually it's not worth, like it's about choosing your battles to win the war.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, very strong language there, Julie, about winning the war. But it's the same thing.
Adversarial.
But it's that experience that I think others on the call, as I said, that maybe people who are newly in post need to see that, and they need to understand that, and that's kind of, this is kind of par, it's par for the course. I mean, it's not always that confrontational and negative, but I just think it's important and this is why we're kind of sharing it amongst each other. So Lisa, sorry, you wanted to come in there just.
This is just one for groups. We found that if you can bring a leader on board in a group, they'll often have the people in their group look up to them, because the council can be seen as this, demonic presence, where you're looking to slap someone on the wrist, which is not the case, but there is a perception. We're not sold very well, unfortunately, in the public eye, and sometimes. So if you can get on board with a leader who often can be, quite good, convince them of whatever you might be trying to do, they'll bring others along. So you're demonstrating a lead by example in a kind of covert way, and that can be quite good. And then the other thing as well, that we find, because I did the education awareness pieces there in that bubble, if you can have good case studies of whatever you may do and communicate them out, it gets the conversations going. So you don't have to explain everything, but if you can show the good of something, well then, you're on that path to changing a behavior and getting those, seeds of thinking out there, which is, it's baby steps in some things, but that's just some things I just wanted to say.
That's it. No, that's it, Lisa. And that's that kind of speaks to what we spoke about in November and what we were just speaking about now. And the kind of principle that we would have always had is, it's not always the message. We can spend a lot of time kind of trying to figure out the communications campaign internally, but it's actually who's going to say it. And people trust others. They'll trust their friends and the family, even if they're saying something misinformation or disinformation or whatever, that we know that they'll trust them more. So trying to kind of tap into those kind of community leaders. And as I said, Julie's experience, that it's not always that easy and straightforward, but it's maybe taking that longer term view. Like you could say, what do we need to communicate, but who are we going to work with to communicate that out? And again, I know it's something myself and Joanna were talking about, in terms of there are different types of leaders, and some of them are very obvious and they put themselves forward, but then sometimes leaders within the community are less obvious, and it's about trying to work at what's going to work within the particular community you're engaging with. Thanks, Lisa. Ralph, just.
I'm working with the Southeast Energy Agency, also I'm not in local authority, but I'm working with local authorities and support them. And so for some projects that we want to implement, we found as a local authority so very positive response, but so there's a kind of reluctant because they are understaffed. So that is what they said by themselves, the most of them understaffed, and they fear not to deliver their work that they want to, or that they have to deliver when they take on climate action.
Yeah.
And then they don't there's no mandate for them. That's not mandatory, and even when they have their L cups and C cups and also local authority climate action plan or the sustainable, also von the convenient of major. So even there's a demand or there's a target that they so have to fulfill more or less. So there's always this three things: understaffed, fear not to deliver the work, and there's no mandate, and they have the fear to fail. So that is what we experience. So this fear to be the first one, and
That's there's four kind of critical points there that we could probably spend all day discussing. But I think the first one is kind of is particularly interesting because it's about being realistic, right? So every, as I said, I remember the time when we didn't have climate action officers, we didn't have community climate coordinators, and it was a huge amount of effort required. Even though that we have these people in place, we need to be very honest and say it's still a huge, demand and requirement, and the role of the climate action. We can't underestimate how significant it is, but it also means that maybe we need to be realistic about what can be done, and it's a case of picking. I'm not going to say picking your battles, but picking your areas of communication, picking your areas of engagement that that you can do, and just kind of work where you can, rather than just getting overwhelmed and saying, like a lot of the climate action plans have far too many actions. It becomes overwhelming. How are we going to deliver this? How are we going to manage it? How are we going to communicate it? I sort of say, let's, just maybe not try to cover everything, and just be a bit strategic about, building communications and engagement around the bits that you can do and that you can manage. And, don't be, just I suppose being honest to yourself and sort of say, look, the resources that we have, there's only so much that we can do, and stuff like that. And then the fear of failure. So I know there was two other points in between, but that fear of failure it's a huge thing. But as I said, that's why these kind of groups that Tipperary Energy Agency are kind of pulling together are so important. It's kind of everybody who's on this call is going through. Is tackling kind of similar challenges. Things will work, things will don't work, and we just need to be, working together to sort of say, well, look, if things, sharing those kind of things that went well, but also sharing when it didn't go well, and then supporting, supporting each other. Yeah. So there's a huge. And Ralph, where are you based?
Kilkenny, also Southeast Energy Agency in Kilkenny.
Yeah.
And
right. I could see. Sorry, I could see that there was a comment there about local volunteers and stuff, and this is again is a huge kind of issue and a huge debate, particularly around kind of communications, because quite often it's the volunteers who are on the ground, 24/7, and are kind of the advocates and the people to kind of work with. But there's also, we know that there's been changes obviously since COVID, and people commuting times increasing or decreasing, etc., etc. And so the kind of the pool of volunteers became quite kind of reduced quite significantly, but there's also volunteer burnout and all those kind of things. But I just wondered if anybody has a kind of a comment just in terms of what Dee has sort of said about the role of volunteers in your kind of, in terms of delivering your climate action plan, that might have worked or may not have worked around kind of communications. I don't know if anybody has a kind of a lesson or kind of an experience to share. Or Dee, maybe you want to kind of elaborate a little bit more just on. Are you still there?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I suppose, gosh, where do I start on that one? I've been a volunteer for many years myself, and I was a volunteer chair of the Environmental Network before I became Environmental Awareness Officer in Carlisle County Council. So experienced that drop-off of volunteers and the burnout effect of being a volunteer, trying to carry all this between us. But in recent, over the last 6 months, year actually, we've noticed a change, and it is about how you communicate the messaging to people. So something the Environmental Network have done quite well is, instead of asking people to attend meetings all the time, they've been running film festivals for the last few years, environmental film festivals. And I know in my volunteer role, we engaged with the County Council. It's very strange because I've had to step back from conflict of interest and kind of just support them now, but also understanding the needs. And then last year, so they were running the environmental film networks for film shows for a year. And then what has really made a difference from the volunteer point of view is they've started running climate cafes. Now, they've only had 2 before Christmas, and it's something they're planning to do. So the films this year and the climate cafes. And that the climate cafes engaged people in a much more informal way of talking about it. The first one was quite structured. The second one was much more informal, and it attracted more young people and a lot more conversation. And new people now have jumped onto the committee as a result of just the 2 climate cafes. So I think from a local authority point of view now, I'm trying to work with CCN to support them in their activities, and then I'm also kind of mentioning the awareness campaigns and the education campaigns that I'll be running, and they will be linking in with those and running their climate cafes and films in to support me in my role doing that. So yeah, that's my 2 credits.
I'd say no, you weren't a plant, but that's a really good example of what we were saying around. So sometimes with the communications, when we have campaigns, it's all about control of the message, and it's control within the local authority. It's through all your own channels and that kind of stuff. Whereas we know you don't have the resources to do, to kind of cover all aspects of communications, and it's trying to work with those networks that already exist. When we talked about that kind of collaborative or kind of participatory kind of approach, and it's just linking in with those, and those kind of engagements, whether it's climate cafes or kind of the Creative Climate Fund has been running kind of art projects and kind of cultural projects around the country. They're all part of communicating your climate action plan, and it's a case of working with them. So, with the limited resources that you have, you're kind of reaching wider, and more broadly out into your community. That's a really kind of good example. I just see somebody's asked the question, what's a climate cafe?
So Friends of the Earth actually have on their website Friends of the Earth have on their website how to run a climate cafe package. That was the first one we used as a template. And then it's really just an informal gathering. So the 2 we ran, I'm saying we, I didn't actually attend either of them. The 2 they ran were in 2 different cafes that usually are only open daytimes, but they actually asked could they come in and help, and they opened in the evening for the events. And it was coffee shops, so 2 different coffee shops, and it was the committee had structured a couple of questions that they asked people and wanted to talk about, and then just got it was just an evening of bringing people into a cafe, sharing tea and coffee and chatting about climate issues. I could talk a lot more about the environmental network that I was involved with and how we've done that. If anyone wants to talk to me separately about that, I'm happy to share that. But that's
who paid for the coffee?
People paid for their own coffee.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lisa,
yeah, they paid for their own coffee, and I think the environmental network paid a little bit towards. I don't even know if they did actually. The cafe might even have supplied brownies as well as a little lure. But it benefits the cafe as well, because they're getting people into the cafe who mightn't have gone into the cafe before. Yeah. And the one before Christmas, the cafe themselves actually ran, they had artists in there selling different locally made gifts as well. So it kind of was a shop local thing it turned into.
Lisa, sorry, thanks, Steve. Like, Lisa, that kind of question is, so sometimes we've had this discussion with when you're looking at kind of like further down the line when it comes to resources and you want to do a campaign and, you know, and you might be thinking about the kind of the high cost of running a climate festival or, you know, a billboard campaign, whereas actually sometimes getting people together is you might just need to buy a couple of bags of biscuits and a couple of jars of
Yeah,
coffee. And that's the
exactly.
kind of the expense, you know.
And
So
you're
it's not,
setting up a precedent if you do it the first time. So that's why I was
yeah,
asking. But I tell you,
yeah,
for the older cohort, you can't beat the offer of tea and biscuits. Do you know, like
yeah.
people would go, I've been told people will go just for the tea and biscuits, whatever we're doing. So that's just
There's particular
interesting.
types, some yeah, no, some engagement people will say there's certain types of biscuits that they know work well with different audiences and stuff. So but but again, I'm not being facetious, but I think that's like it's actually really important as part of that overall discussion. It's about seeing what works, and it's not always about kind of defaulting to, you know, large scale, large scale media campaigns and heavy investment. Sometimes it is just about getting those conversations happening in the community. And Evelyn, sorry, you asked a question about the Climate Cafe. Does that answer your question? Do you understand it now? And is there something that you've done similar that you thought you might want to share or?
No, but I agree with the point. You know, I would have worked with Cynthia O'Mahony, who's our climate action coordinator, and we had an energy clinic in the local library, which has like a suitable space, like a studio space. But yeah, definitely one of the lures was that there was going to be kind of, you know, scones and tea and everything. So yeah, I think those things do really matter. And then we targeted specifically people in community centres and also were very kind of linked into tidy towns, those sort of activities. Almost as a thank you as well. I mean, they tend to be quite well connected people and everything else. So yeah, that was important, and we had a couple of energy hampers. It was specifically a tune-up clinic, energy tune-up clinic, and very practical advice, and kind of focused on things like dampness and mold, and kind of understanding your energy bill. We had a couple of speakers from SEAI and from the CRU who were explaining about bills and that kind of thing. Very informal gathering, but I think, yeah, definitely it's a whole combination of things that attract people. And like it was on in the morning during the day, and it's like, you know, a lot of people signed up to it and actually turned up because you're never really quite sure are people going to do it, and we're very grateful. So it seemed to kind of work well. I mean, it's not an ongoing cafe, but I just think a lot of those factors, I mean, we did pay for the refreshments and everything, but it was round tables and, you know, short presentations at the start, but mostly it was kind of almost like a show and tell and networking as well and everything. So I think those type of formats work quite well. So I don't know if Cynthia wants to add anything there.
I see Cynthia just dropped the link to the Climate Cafe in the chat. I mean, again, it's kind of interesting. Obviously, this is kind of like I mean, again, I don't know in terms of Sicania with the kind of the Own Your CCAP program or whatever. Are there other ways of sharing these kind of stories about what people have been doing? Because quite often we're so busy, you know, delivering what we have to do activity, you know.
Definitely, I can like send a form that you can fill in with your own, you know, examples, and we can publish it in our newsletter as well. There is an Own Your CCAP newsletter, which where you can share your inputs. So that
just because everybody on the call is kind of. Oh, sorry. I see Cynthia has.
Yeah.
Karen, I will come to you in a second. Sorry, sorry.
And I actually wanted to bring Karen in as well, because another thing that we're planning here in DLR is the over 60s climate conversations. And I know Karen has carried that out with Jacinta Barons in Laois as well. So we're doing that as well, starting in March for 6 weeks. And same thing, I mean, Jacinta Barons will be leading this workshop over 6 weeks, but it's tea and coffee and things as well, and the main thing is the chats afterwards. So it's not a climate cafe, it is a course, but it is something, we'll see how that goes, and it might be something in the future we want to consider doing on a regular basis, or at least doing one during Climate Action Week, a climate cafe, and see what happens from there.
Yeah, no,
Just
that's
to
great.
quickly jump in, sorry, that was me that did the conversations in Laois.
I
And
just
if
put a
you
correction there in the
yeah,
comments, Lisa.
if you want to have a quick chat with me about it, I've got some tips and tricks for you because we struggled and we didn't struggle. So I'll just for
Oh,
future.
oh yeah, that'd be brilliant. I might
Okay.
connect with you after that because I know I spoke with Anya
Sinead and Offaly.
and Anya in Carlo who did it as well. So it's she's making the rounds, Jacinta, which is great. Yeah, no, I'll connect with you afterwards, Lisa.
That's right. And when I was coming back to Cynthia, when I was coming back to Sacania, there was, I think there are others on the call actually. I mean, this is the idea, you're kind of sharing kind of stuff that you're doing, what's working and maybe what's not working. And I think this idea of, maybe it's a cultural thing that we like tea and biscuits and having the chats and stuff. And it's like, it's sometimes when we look at the report of what happened, it all looks perfect. But actually, as a group on the call here, we need to be sharing the kind of the things that did work and the lessons learned, and maybe what didn't go so well and stuff like that, and be honest with each other. And I think that's going to be quite important, over 2025. So, Karen, sorry, I know you put the correction
Just
in the chat there, but sorry,
Yeah.
Joanna, you wanted to.
no, I just actually wanted to say, Simon, just in terms of time that we will
Yeah.
have to round up for break, so we come back into the next session.
Yeah, I was going to suggest, would ever be okay if we maybe didn't do a 10-minute break, just kind of went through or do people want to break?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see Karen says we want to break. Okay, Karen's decided.
Because I'm the only one on camera. Oh dear.
Okay, so Karen, if you I know you had your hand up, so if you raise your point, and then we'll have a kind of a quick break, and then we'll kind
No,
of
it
come
was
back in. So yeah.
back to Lisa's question on who paid for the tea and coffee. It is important. I think the experience can be that when it's a council sponsored event, obviously the council want and deserve recognition for supporting different initiatives, financially and otherwise. But then the optics for people who might attend, certain audiences that might attend, they mightn't see themselves as the type of person who attends a council event. So in a lot of our modelling of community events, we're moving towards allowing the groups to really lead on, promotion and invites. So say hopefully our next Climate Action Festival in Laois, we only had our first one there in 2024, that will be the model that will be followed. So so it's a bit of a balance between supporting financially and otherwise these initiatives, but also opening up the door for attendance to people who may not see themselves in the bracket of a person who would attend an event run by the council. Anyway, it's just a comment.
Karen, yeah, no, but it kind of builds on what Dee was sort of saying, and what we're trying to kind of get across is that there's a control over communications and your social media and all that kind of stuff. Whereas actually, it's being open enough to support and enable others to do the kind of climate communications on your behalf, and putting that support out into the communities and stuff. And I know there is kind of always issues around who owns it and who owns the impact and all that kind of stuff. But actually, being I just think we're seeing that type of communications being more impactful, and it's bringing in different audiences, and it's kind of it's going to where people are and stuff. So I think that's crucially important. And again, you weren't a plant, but you're kind of reinforcing the stuff that we've been saying. So that's great. So we might just break for. Sorry, Joanna. I know I have a chronic inability to keep the time. I always want to hear what people have to say, but maybe if we just take a break for 5 minutes. Yeah, 5 minutes, and then we'll come back, and we're gonna go into the nitty-gritty of messaging. So thanks everyone. So yeah, I just say if you come back, we'll start back at 10 to. Hi, Fiona. I think you just joined the call there. We're just having a couple of minutes of a break. We'll be starting back in a couple of minutes. Dee, where are you based?
I'm in Carlow.
Carlo. Oh yeah.
So I started here in August, so I would have I've a strong background in community education.
Yeah.
And horticultural and environmental education. So I was actually quite surprised by the EPA figures that said, you know, the awareness of climate change, because I haven't found that myself locally.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, like any of those kind of national kind of attitudinal surveys, we always like to say we kind of try to triangulate a little bit with, that's the kind of, the climate in the Irish mind. I suppose it's the most significant in terms of the scale of, the amount of people who respond to the survey and the location and the kind of the follow-up kind of interviews and stuff like that. But there are other ones like Eurobarometer and a few other ones that we do kind of look to and sort of see. And there's also a time sensitivity over them because it's not always consistent, so the time of year that these surveys go out kind of influence how people, but the key message is that there's a kind of it's trying to find the things that people do kind of share in terms of what they see as valuable, and maybe not trying to convince the unconvincible, because you could spend the rest of the rest of your life trying to do that. So there's an element of just, and who do you target, who do you target to, and that kind of stuff. So,
and I suppose I've always gone from the start with the bottom up approach.
Yeah.
And I was one of the founder members of Community Gardens Ireland, which is now really grown in awareness and support. But and again, it was a bottom-up approach, and it was, and and it was interesting hearing earlier, because in all my work in horticulture and community gardens, you could always bring environment and climate action into that, and I suppose that's what I'm now doing now with. We had food waste. I'm running some food waste workshops. I have a tutor coming in at the moment doing those, and it's not just, it's looking at food waste as a climate action primarily, and it's just changing the narrative slightly to.
That's exactly it. I mean, we often sort of say, so we would do, before EMCO, I used to be within the EPA, and kind of they have their kind of stock food waste kind of program, but it was often what I was trying to get, preventing food waste is the lowest cost but probably biggest impact climate action you can take, in some respects. We can't all afford to retrofit homes, but we can kind of definitely prevent food, and it's just trying to reframe the stuff that people kind of get and they understand, and and then kind of connecting that to kind of climate, and we'll touch on that in a second. So I think we might just start backside, Joanna. Thanks for the time. Thanks for the timekeeping. So I just think it's kind of valuable just for people in the room to be hearing what each other is doing, because we don't always get the opportunity to do that. So just in terms of the next 30 minutes, we just kind of wanted to kind of just talk through some of the kind of the different approaches to messaging. So we sort of said, like, what we had discussed is the kind of maybe what works, the different mechanisms for doing it, but we wanted to kind of bring it back to kind of specifically to communications. And because of the people on the call are more coming from the kind of the climate side rather than the communication side, what we kind of want from this is that you're starting to be able to think about, how am I going to engage with my communications team, and how do I let them know the stuff that's in the climate action plan that needs to be delivered and needs to be communicated, and what are the different approaches that we might what are the different approaches how we might do that. We're not expecting kind of climate climate officers or coordinators to become communications experts. So just to it's a case of kind of, I suppose, listening and sort of seeing how might this be relevant, and then how can you then start to work with your comms teams or your communities that you're working with, to supporting them to deliver communications activities. So one of the things we want to just this, and again, none of this is kind of cookie cutter approach, but we just wanted to highlight a couple of the frameworks that are often used in communications to help, I suppose, frame the kind of the messaging, which then informs the channels through which you might communicate, and the mechanisms that you might communicate, or the assets that you might develop around communications. And there's kind of three which we've kind of without sort of kind of naming the kind of the frameworks, we've been kind of talking about this in the last session and this morning, but the one that's kind of the most, I suppose, it's a very commonly used kind of communications framework around climate communications, and it speaks well to this idea of enabling people to take action. And again, it might seem obvious, but it's called the problem solution benefit framework. And really what it is you're looking at what it is that we need to communicate, but you're very clearly articulating what the issue is or the problem. You're presenting very clearly what the practical or proposed solution is to that, and then highlighting the benefits. So it's following that sort of sequence. What's the issue? What's being done about it, and what's the benefit of doing it? And I'll come back to this in a second. I'll explain it in a little bit more detail, and I want to open it out to the floor to sort of see if each of these approaches might work. The second one is the values one, which I've been kind of emphasizing, I suppose, a lot in terms of kind of connecting to people's value and what they see as important. But again, it's just one of the three frameworks that we're suggesting. But really, the value-based approach is kind of connecting climate action to the core values and aspirations of your audience. So it's kind of it used to be in kind of communications, you tell people what it is and why they should use it, whereas this kind of frames turns it around a little bit. It's kind of like the why, the what, and the how. It's kind of and it's about what's why would people want to respond or to engage with the communications. And then there's the story based, which is using kind of narratives, real life examples, to bring kind of climate action and to inspire action by showing people what other people are doing. And again, hopefully this is you kind of get it, and it's kind of part of what your kind of own understanding of communications that you see. But the idea of the story-based approach, it's getting away, as I said at the start, it's getting away from facts and figures and fear and threat appeals, and it's connecting to people on an emotional level, making kind of complex issues around climate much more relatable, and then kind of demonstrating the positive impact of solutions. There's a little bit of overlap between these, in terms of the framing, whether it's positive or negative, but actually they have quite different approaches, and we want you to be thinking about your own kind of climate action plan and what different approaches you might do all three, or you might decide actually we're going to take a storytelling approach to our communications, or we're going to take a problem or a values based approach. But with the problem sort of solution benefit, and again, just to kind of explain it a little bit more, is really when you're thinking about the long list of actions or things that you need to communicate through your action plan, but really the step is around trying to really kind of clearly define specific challenges that you're trying to address. And so I'm not saying move away from the kind of the global perspective to the local, but it's really just trying to be kind of as clear as possible about what the action plan is intending to do, and trying to make it relatable at a local level. So this means around using local examples, local data. So actually it's kind of relevant, and it's, you know, it's relevant to the particular community that you're in. And again, the presentation of solutions, and solutions is probably a bit of a weighted term, but quite often it's kind of approaches that may or may, you know, that are more likely to work. It's not the same. There's the kind of the silver bullet to kind of climate action, but it's around you know, presenting, you know, after you've kind of presented what the problem is, presenting the kind of the key actions or initiatives that would work, explain why they work and why they've been effective. And it's just trying to make, you know, give people that sense of agency that, you know, it's not all doom and gloom, and it's not overwhelming, and things can be done. And for people to see that the communities, yeah, that's a perfect, Karen. You kind of, that's, yeah, perfect. Options but the idea is trying to show but it's trying to show people that, you know, there's kind of things that can be done, so they have that sense of self-efficacy, but also that things are being done, so they understand. You know, I know between in this room, or between all of us on the call, you know, we know the critical role of local authorities. You're kind of at the, you know, you're at the front line, you're engaging with people and communities on a day-to-day basis more than anybody else, more than national government, or, you know, that kind of stuff. But actually it's making them aware that things are being done, so they have that kind of sense of, it's not just, you know, it's not all doom and gloom, but they don't fall into climate denialism or climate anxiety. And then kind of clearly articulating the benefits. So again, we're kind of this thing about the kind of the co-benefits, and I know a few of you have discussed that already, where, you know, we have, you know, people do want kind of clean beaches, or, you know, they do want to be able to, you know, get around and not be stuck in traffic, or, you know, they kind of want these kind of co-benefits, and they see the value of co-benefits, and it's making sure that whatever solutions you're presenting are kind of connecting to benefits that people would see as important. And again, just like examples, this is not, I'm not saying this is just an example of how a, you know, a problem options benefit framework would be, you know, it's like, okay, you know, the kind of the problem is to do with, you know, whether it's rising sea levels or increased frequency of storms impacting on threatening coastal communities in particular county. The solution is our climate action plan is investing in coastal defences and promotes sustainable land use planning. The benefit of that means by us doing that, we're kind of protecting your home, your local businesses, preserving the coastline, ensuring a safe future for future generations. Now, I'm not saying there's a lot of words in that, but it's just the sequencing. You know, the sequencing, because quite often we either lead with the solution and people don't know why that's important, or they just focus only on the problem and expect people to understand what the solutions are. So it's about trying to have that sequence of always kind of reinforcing, you know, you're not shying away from what the problem is, and you're clearly articulating it. You're clearly sort of saying how your action plan, what options or solutions you're going to put forward, and then so people then clearly understand the benefits. And again, it might seem overly simplistic, but actually if you put them in the wrong order, you get a lot of pushback, or you get a lot of misinformation, or you get a lot of misunderstanding around what's actually happening with the climate action plan. So just in terms of that kind of problem, I'm gonna say the problem options is kind of solution framework. I just want people to reflect on those, particularly those that did the homework, thinking about the actions that you're trying to communicate in 2025 through your action plan. And I just want to see how would that kind of approach work within your own local authority climate action plan? And what do you see as maybe some of the potential weaknesses or strengths of that approach in terms of how you're currently doing or how you're planning to do communication? So I'll just give you just a couple of seconds just to pause on it and have a think. And then if somebody wants to come forward and share, and if not, I'll do the old school teacher thing, and I might pick on someone and someone who maybe hasn't spoken just to date. But that just I'll just go back a little bit. So I just want you to be thinking about, if we were to take this approach to developing our climate communications, and we're going to have the problem options benefit approach, would that work well in our local authority and with our climate action plan? And, you know, what might be some of the strengths or weaknesses? I know. Also, yeah, it's kind of I suppose, sorry, if people haven't seen it, Dee sort of said it's tricky without a comms team, but again, I suppose that the thing is the comms team are probably going to look for this type of framing from yourselves. So if you kind of understand what they might need to work with in terms of a communications framework, hopefully, and they won't understand the climate action plan. I mean, no offense to, I'm sure some comms people, but you understand much more about the context, much more about the plan, much more about what's happening in communities. So they're going to look for you to kind of at least articulate what the kind of problem and solutions and benefits are. Yeah, so just be interested if anybody else had any. Can you see this working within the communications of your climate action plan? And I don't see any hands shooting up, so I'm going to do the old Eddie. Sorry, just you're on my screen and I can see you, and I can see you having a nice sup of tea. Just thinking about that approach. How do you think that might work within your context? Yeah.
Yeah, my context is slightly different. I'm taking this from an internal approach. So I'm not looking at the public. I'm not looking at volunteers or anything. I'm looking at staff. Yeah. And I just got the data in there today, and staff behavior hasn't changed in relation to basically turning off their monitors and switching off their lights in the evening. And the wastage is about €50,000 a year. So like it's quite substantial, like financial wise. So yeah, we do have a problem, and the solution is basically for staff to turn off their PCs as they go home in the evening and turn off their monitors and take a little bit of personal responsibility. So, and the benefit will be a reduction in CO2 gas emissions. So that's what I need to get back and talk to our energy team about. Going, can you give me a good figure for the amount of energy or the amount of greenhouse gases that are needlessly going into the atmosphere on an annual basis, so I can sort of try and reinforce this. But even listening to the conversation earlier, like we're like the kind of council staff are a community and a meet in a social context as well. So I really like that idea of a community cafe or a climate cafe, holding one of those internally and just seeing if we can get like-minded people to come out of the woodwork, because they are there. It's just that they're not making themselves visible. So
yeah.
But yeah, so I've got a specific problem solution, and the benefit is ultimately to save money. But like, you're not going to save that, because that's a poor message to put out internally, because they're never going to see the benefit of saving the money. The €50,000 is not going to go into their pocket, like, so it's going to have to be about greenhouse gas emissions. And
Eddie, Micheál here. I'm in the climate action team in Waterford. And I wasn't at the first meeting, but I presume some people that were at the first meeting will jump in and tell you to go back to the webinar from it and to look specifically at the influences, because those of us coming in, I've done it. I've gone over to the other buildings and gone around and looked at energy usage. And then I looked at the webinar from the last one, which told me I had absolutely wasted my time, that I was about 10% effective. But sorry, I was very I'm delighted to discover when I wasted my time, because it was very clear that it's the CEO, it's senior management, and what they say and how they influence, and that it's line managers, and that when it comes down to it, the all yawn from across the way who turns up kind of once every 6 months and tuts is obviously not going to make any difference at all. And I think any amount of climate cafes within that grouping as well would have minimal effect. But where, as it was said at the last webinar, where the line manager shows that what they expect is good correct behavior in terms of energy usage, and that the natural inclination of staff is to try to satisfy their line manager. It's quite, I found it quite gutting to read that, because I'm going kind of, you mean all the good stuff isn't landing, and it kind of, no, it just means you have to target it, and that if the CEO is seen, if there's a post up of him with his finger switching off a light switch and going, Timmy always knocks off the lights when he's going home, that will have way more relevance and impact. And I found that one very, very interesting.
Yeah,
It's interesting. Oh yeah, sorry, Eddie.
No, I thought that was very good. Like, I missed that. I was at the first meeting and I did realize that, and I was like, going, yeah, I'm going to have to get my manager or management team involved. But yeah.
Yeah, there's obviously different motivations for kind of internal comms and trying to create change within the organization, and people won't necessarily see the value, and so you just have to tailor it. I mean, some of the principles are the same, that people need to understand the why, what is the problem, why are we doing this, they need to understand what needs to be done, and then what the kind of the benefit is. And the benefit may be just kind of aligning with the kind of the line manager's interests, or the role of the local authority. So it's trying to work through that a little bit. So sorry, Dee, you wanted to come in there as well?
Yeah, it was just picking up on that comment about somebody's mentioned it in the chat about GHG emissions. So something that now I know we're speaking to the converted and also speaking to community people who want to make a difference. What came over every single time there was a film held, an environmental film, somebody would ask, what can we do? So I think it's not a case, it's as you said there, it's reframing it. This is what you can do to make a difference, and it doesn't matter how small or big. What you're doing is making a difference. And also, I was actually at an event recently, and I've been hearing this over and over. One person might not make a difference, but 8 billion will. And actually, if you keep on saying that message, I think that starts to resonate with people.
Indeed, that's really within this kind of the problem, options, kind of benefits, kind of a framework. It's kind of recognizing that, some the benefits won't be different for everyone. So trying to understand, what are the benefits for the particular audience that you're dealing with. But that solution bit is quite important, because you don't want to be setting people up to fail. Or if you don't give them options around what can be done and the practical steps and how they kind of contribute, people will say, well, I don't even know where to start, and why would I bother, and stuff. So it's having those kind of elements together kind of can help. I don't know. I mean, I'd say ideally they need to be in that kind of sequence, so people understand the why, what needs to be done, and how do I do it, and what's the benefit. But if you leave one out, you quite often you're kind of setting people up to fail. And again, how you kind of communicate to senior management or like CEO level, can be kind of different. So it's things like, and Joanna, sorry, I know we have this with kind of the public sector program in SEI, where it's kind of, we know, at CEO level, it's these are the targets that you have to achieve. This is what you're responsible for. This is, the 2030 targets. These are the things you need to do to be able to close that gap between where you're at now and where you need to be by 2030. If they can understand that, they can then start to communicate out to the organization, or provide permission, or enable kind of teams within the organization to do different activities around climate and stuff. So it's just that they all need to be slightly different. But again, the kind of the core thing is, it's the three bits working together are kind of important, because if you leave one out, you can be setting people up to fail. I'm just conscious. Anybody else just wanted to, just on the question, did they see this? Because we're going to go through the other two as well. But and again, I wanted to make sure you understand the difference when you start to go to your comms team and asking them to develop campaigns for you. So anybody else just on this particular one, or will I move on to the next one? Joanna, did you want to say anything on
Simon?
On this,
there's a number of comments.
I'm staring at a screen, a presentation slide, so I can't see the questions.
No worries. I'll just read them out. So Julie just addressed Eddie's comment, and she said that we established a green team within the local authority, and we tried to get a member from nearly every department or directorate, and the intention is that they take info back peer-to-peer to their colleagues. Yeah. So that is one of the options. Then Gary as well added that not sure staff would be motivated by GHG emission, like greenhouse gas emission reductions either. Maybe looking at comparing areas or departments, people want to do what everyone else is doing. So almost also gamification might help. And then Ailing, I don't know if I have pronounced your name. I've butchered your name. I'm so sorry if I have. She said also a bit of healthy competition between sections, and an award system delivered by senior management works well. And Lisa said that it's that top-down leadership needed for internal energy actions. There's an... Sorry?
No, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
And the last comment is we gave most energy efficient large section, medium and small awards. So there was an award given to people internally. So that might motivate them to do so.
I used to be quite skeptical of awards, just, so just, sorry, the phrase gamification, if people don't have, I mean, I'm sure most people may have heard it now, but it means using the kind of underlying mechanisms of play and games, which is competition or collaboration or whatever, to make people work together and undertake activities. And there's kind of an innate human thing around kind of reward and incentive, which can be worked with well for behavior change. I used to be kind of against awards because they tend to be one-off, and the issue that Eddie has is, when you're trying to change habits rather than behaviors and attitudes, it needs to be sustained. So the idea, we know, same with New Year's resolutions, you might roll out a campaign around kind of switching off or reduce your use. People will respond in a kind of a short-term window, and they'll start to do it. But once, the posters start to fade into the background, and people kind of revert back to kind of their kind of normal previous behavior. So the idea needs to be, if that kind of engagement around those types of behaviors need to be kind of sustained and ongoing, and not just like once a year or through a competition and stuff, but actually they're still important. So it's rather than saying maybe it's not just a monetary prize or a prize, but it's maybe showing recognition of what people are doing and highlighting the value of the work that people have been doing within the organization, and making their kind of their efforts visible to the whole organization can be a stronger motivator as a a one for all voucher or something like that. Sorry, Lisa, you wanted to come in there, and I'm going to move on to the next one in a second, but just I can see Joanna looking at me with the time wise.
If you're stuck, it's fine. I was just going to give you some examples from us. Okay, the problem solution benefit. I don't know if anyone's ever drove through Portlaoise, but we have this concept of a town in a garden. So all our roundabouts, or nearly all of them, are going to be or are pollinator friendly. So we have a huge planting scheme going out through the whole town, and it hits you. It's in your, people, they love it. We haven't had any bad comments, and it becomes a norm, and that's promoting pollinators and biodiversity. And we have a very strong Portlaoise Tidy Towns team who have sown loads of trees and are greening up the town in every crevice. So that's just something from the biodiversity perspective that we found has gone down very well, and a nice thing to promote. And the story-based stuff, we're quite intense on the active travel here in Portlaoise. We've got Bolt bikes, and we have a travel cluster going on with the green schools and 10 mainstream schools. So we're finding that if we can get the kids, the students, to tell their parents that they want to walk or cycle, just values, stories like that can help change behavior of older people, because it's harder to change like old dog new tricks. So that's just two things I just wanted to throw in there that might be useful.
That's great. And we'll come to the story stuff in a second, Lisa, but it was kind of funny, that idea of working with young people to kind of pest, it's called it the pester power of kids. I mean, it's used negatively by certain parts of the marketing community or whatever, but actually it's quite important. It can be done in ways that are kind of, it's just bringing it back to people's daily lives and their homes, and it's not something that's done by, climate action isn't done by somebody, like the Deep Greens, or it isn't done by a particular sector. It's done by everybody, and it's just part of your daily life. I think that's quite important. So I'm just going to move on to the next one. So when we were talking about the value-based approach, now this, as I said, all of these can work well together, but we're trying to kind of get across that there's no cookie cutter, there's no single one approach, and it's for you to be thinking through which is going to work well in your area. So like the values-based approach is obviously just considering the values that are important to the community, and again, it's this idea of where are the shared interests between maybe opposing groups. It's one of the things that people who maybe aren't climate people, but they have kind of a shared interest in the town or the local beach or whatever. And then you're then connecting your communications to the things that people value. So rather than trying to convince them climate is an important thing, you're starting with the things that they see important, and then connecting climate and climate action to that. And then you're maybe changing some of the language. So you're trying to use language that resonates, so it's again, this is kind of a broad area, but it's kind of trying to say, well, rather than just talking about GHG or greenhouse gas emissions or 2030 targets or, climate adaptation or carbon sequestration or whatever. It's trying to communicate what you're doing using the language that will resonate to the kind of the shared value that the people who you're trying to communicate to will resonate with them. And, again, just examples will be this. Again, this is not a these are just kind of for off the top of our head examples, but it was just a case of, if you were to take that approach, your kind of messaging will be like, our climate action plan is more than about reducing emissions. It's about protecting our community or the natural beauty of the environment that we live in for future generations. So again, it's sort of saying, look, it's trying to frame the purpose of the plan in things that people might be more interested in their local beach or their local community than they are about greenhouse gas emissions. And so you're just kind of connecting that. And then or things like, by investing in renewable energy and green infrastructure, we can create new jobs, boost our local economy, and build a more sustainable future. So if you're talking to business groups, you're kind of framing the messaging around the things that they might be interested in terms of the local economy and employment. Now, it's not to say you're kind of this kind of values-based approach is kind of, it's obviously quite, because it requires you to really understand the communities and the audiences that you're kind of speaking to. And so it requires a bit of reflection. So if you've been doing kind of community engagement events, or you have other attitudinal survey data or other survey, it's about looking at that information and being really clear about, that you really are understanding the values of the people who you're trying to communicate with, and then working from, working from there. So it requires a bit of upfront preparation, a bit, a kind of good insights in terms of what the actual values, are of the communities that you're trying to speak to. What it also kind of implies is that you don't speak to everybody at all times at the same way. And so it's trying to think about, if you're having a kind of overarching kind of climate campaign around your action plan, you might be focusing on different audiences at different stages, and just being aware of that. And you're not changing the messaging as such, or you're not changing the kind of the purpose of the communications, which is around informing or enable people to take climate action, but you're just getting people to that point in slightly different ways. Again, sorry, there's a lot even within that, but I just wanted to kind of get a sense of this kind of more values-based communications, which means kind of tailoring messages for different groups. Is that something that kind of you feel might work within your own local authority, and your climate action plan, and what you see is maybe some of the benefits or the weaknesses of doing that? Or if anybody has any experience of actually doing a campaign using value-based communications, you might be able to share. I don't know if anybody wants to respond.
There's a comment there from D, Simon.
Oh, T. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Hi, T. Did you want to say? I'm going to try and bring somebody else. Sorry, Dean. No, I'm going to try and bring
it's
somebody
fine.
else.
It was just a comment. That's why I didn't raise my hand.
So can you say it? Can you say that? Just because I actually think it's quite important. Can you just, because I could read it out, but I think, can you just say what your comment is?
Yeah, sorry, I'm aware I'm hogging everything. But I just wanted to raise the point that I feel it's important.
You're on mute there,
Okay.
Nancy. Sorry.
You're muted. Yeah.
Sorry. Yes, that's why I dropped it as a comment, because I don't want to hog the call. But I'm the only EAO as far as I can see in the list here, and there's a lot of climate action people, and I know EAOs have different roles within local authorities, but I would recommend that the climate teams definitely link in with the EAOs, so the EAOs can raise awareness, and then the action teams come in to help them with the actions. So it's more of an integrated approach.
And I'm going to say it again, you weren't a plant, but that really kind of speaks very strongly to what this approach means. So if you're tailoring different communications to different audiences, it means you were going to, like the climate action officer and the comms people are going to maybe work with other sections of the local authority and other teams, just to, because, you may not, if you're going to work with, say, you're going to target the business community, for example, or, particular age groups or whatever, you're going to have to then link in with your colleagues in different sections of the local authority to work through, you'll go to them and say, look, these are the things that we need to get across, and then be like, okay, who are the audiences, what really matters to them, and then work through. And it wouldn't be any expectation that the climate action officer or community climate action or the EAO will understand all that, but it's important in the process of developing the communications, as I say, is to speak to the other roles within the local authority. So a great point. Does somebody else just want to? I mean, I feel I'd just be interested if anybody wants to maybe reflect on that from their own local authority, maybe one that we haven't heard from yet. I might pick on somebody. So, Laura, we've heard from you. I know. Sorry, go on, Laura.
No, you've heard from me, but it depends. I was just going to say we had a really good example of a GAA club. So for them, a value is having warm showers after a football match, and so they've put in heat pumps as part of the Community Climate Action Fund, and it has changed the conversation throughout the whole thing. Everybody's really delighted with these warm showers, and the man who installs them is proud as punch and is talking to community or to GAA clubs all around Mayo to spread this story. So to me, I think values and stories work really, really well together, because the values are a part of the story. I don't really see them as separate. So it was just a really good recent example.
Yeah, no, it's again, that's a really good, it's a really good example, and it's kind of tailoring the message around what people actually want and what they need, but you're actually achieving what, in terms of the purpose of your climate action plan. You're kind of getting, whether it's retrofitting sports, sports buildings and stuff like that. I think that's really important. And you're right, these do overlap and they can be used interchangeably. So it's not we don't want it to be seen as kind of a cookie cutter approach. Was there anybody else who wanted to come in from another local authority, maybe? No. Okay, I might move on to the next one. Is that okay? Yeah. So this is what Laura, this is what you were saying, the kind of the storytelling framework, right? So I mean, the general principle has always been people, remember stories, they don't remember data, so the idea is statistics work well for people maybe within organizations or kind of internal communications, but for kind of the public, people, and we're kind of, it's not just Irish people in terms of storytelling, it's a kind of a global human understanding around how we engage and kind of connecting people on an emotional level. But the idea is, and one of the questions that we had at the start, which we didn't kind of cover because but was around, what are the kind of inspiring things that you see happening within your community that kind of give you hope that climate action is kind of moving and is kind of progressing. And the reason we were kind of asking that is because if you're taking this kind of approach, again, it's different to the standard problem options benefits kind of approach, but it means that you need to spend a bit of time thinking through, or what are the kind of the local stories that you think might help communicate different aspects of what you want to achieve within your climate action plan. And that again requires a bit of time, a bit of on the ground. Sorry, somebody just kind of mute.
Yeah, I muted all the participants, so it's fine.
Okay, thanks. So it requires, again, it's quite important, and the reason why I included kind of slides from, say, the National Climate Communications Campaign around we are taking climate action and climate action's work is because that's very much built around the kind of the storytelling approach. It's trying to show people this is what's done and this is the kind of the impact of doing it, but trying to build it around stories of either individuals taking action and what that means in their day-to-day life, or how organizations are working with each other, or working as kind of a sustainable energy community or something equivalent, working together to do climate action. But then it's like to build stories. I mean, there are kind of storytelling kind of specialists or whatever, but the idea is you're trying to craft a message around having a very clear narrative. So you're not just hitting people with, sets of facts or trying to kind of get across this is what the problem is. You're trying to build a narrative around whether it's the daily lived experience of people within the community, or how organizations, local sports groups or local community groups have tackled this over time. The people who you kind of put into the stories obviously need to be relatable to the audience that you're trying to communicate to. And you know, they all the kind of the having that kind of narrative arc, they call, you know, in terms of storytelling, is you also need to you know, have a kind of a very clear kind of call to action, you know, so it isn't just about a nice story that worked well for somebody else. It's about what have I learned from hearing this story, and what can I do, what can I do myself. And again, what we kind of, with the kind of the storytelling approach, is we always try to make sure that it's a, you know, it's trying to you know, rely more heavily kind of on visuals, narratives, videos, kind of testimonies of people actually talking about what they do, rather than, you know, the somebody from the local authority or an individual or a CEO saying this is what other people do. So again, it's kind of it's possibly the more impactful, but it does require a certain amount of time. You know, you need to be engaged with, obviously, with communities, understanding what stories will resonate, and then the time that it will take to kind of develop the kind of the story, the kind of almost the content and the assets and the resources. But we can sort of see this kind of, you know, being used fairly successfully at kind of a national level. But again, obviously, kind of examples would be, you know, rather than talking about agricultural sector and, you know, what needs to happen, you know, across that particular sector, it's focusing in maybe on individual farmers who've undertaken activities and made changes to kind of farming practices, and then using that to illustrate, you know, what the kind of the wider benefits are and what could be achieved at a sort of sectoral level. Or, as I said, it could be about showcasing kind of community initiatives, but showing the kind of the wider co-benefits of what they've done. And it's doing it in a way that people will understand. They'll know their local sports groups, they'll know their local arts groups, they'll know their local residents associations. And actually, if they can see stories built around those, I'm going to call them characters, but that's not what I mean. I think, Joanna, you sort of would use the phrase, they're the climate heroes, because they're the people who are doing stuff. So we're building the story around them rather than trying to say this is what the local authority thinks. It's very much showing, you know, what has been done and how communities are kind of are actually doing climate action. So again, I'd just be interested, just you know, just in terms of thinking about your own kind of climate action plan and communications, how you feel maybe would this storytelling approach work within the context of your climate action plan, and what you see as maybe the kind of the potential kind of strengths or weaknesses of that approach for your own your own local authority. So I might just try and
I'm just thinking in terms of, in the interest of time, I know we're coming up, because you and just mentioned that we have how much more time. Where are we, Kenya?
On time, we are actually on at 12:30.
Yeah. So just maybe we'll move on. We might run over a few minutes here, but just so that you have time to go through that time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, but does nobody want to respond to the storytelling aspect, or will I just jump into the evaluation and the toolkits? Okay, I can see you nodding there, Joanna. So there's a couple of things that we wanted to leave you with, and we're going to email these after. So basically, we wanted you to be thinking about these different frameworks, what might work well within the context of your climate action plan and communications. But really, the kind of emphasis is we don't expect you to be, communications experts. We don't expect you to to know how to pull together an entire communications campaign, multi-channel, all that kind of stuff. But we had a couple of these sort of simple kind of, I suppose, worksheets that you can use when you're thinking of, okay, I need to go speak to my comms person. What are the kind of things that we want to kind of get across? And so there's there's two versions of this one. This one is kind of, if you're able to look at your climate action plan and say, okay, well, what are the actual objectives? What is it that we're actually wanting people to do? Who are the audiences that we want to speak to? Who do you think might be the influencers? Because if you would know maybe some of the community organizations more than some of the comms team, and what are the kind of key messages that you would like to get across? If you're able to fill that out and bring that to a comms person, they can then start to look at that about, how do we bring this alive? How do we create a campaign around this? And how do we build kind of communication? So it's like that kind of first step, if you're able to just think about those three frameworks which you think works, and then how you start to fill this out, you can then bring that to your comms team and say, let's build a campaign around it. This is a slightly it's not more complicated, but it's just a few other options that you might want to start to think through. You'd be like, okay, looking at your climate action plan for 2025, what do you see as the kind of key areas that you want to have communications activities around, emphasizing positive action, all those kind of activities. What is the ask? What are you asking people to do? How do you think this might be implemented? Is it delivered directly by the local authority, or are you going to work through community groups? Why do you think the audience should care? Now, your comms team might have a different view on that, but if you're at least able to say to them, this is why you think the audience would care about this type of messaging, you can articulate to the comms team what you think the benefits would be, and how can the audience be reassured that they'll be followed through? So if they do something, will they see the benefit? If they do something, will the local authority support them? If they do something, it's just making sure that you kind of understand what the follow through support is for communities to do the kind of climate action plan. And it's always good to go to comms teams with ideas that you've seen that you think would work well, to give them something to work from. So it's just a case of, if you're able to say, look, this is what we want to communicate, this is who we want to speak to, this is what we see as the benefits. And we know that because of the climate action plan, there's supports, there's funding, or there's grants, or there's advice, or there's other things that the audience can access after they've received the kind of the messaging or the communications activity. And this is something that I think you could use to just, as I say, just to fill it out, and it would really help the comms team to as I think Joanna, we sort of say the thing like the comms team will bring it alive, and they'll think about the overarching campaign. There's a couple of things. This would be something for the communications team to be thinking about. This is almost what they would be doing when they're developing a communications plan. They will take the stuff that you've said to them around, the benefits, the audiences, and what you're actually trying to achieve, but they need to really understand the kind of the context of the communications activity. They'll need to work through the audiences, and they'll already have different audience segmentation at a local authority level, and they'll have that information. They'll then start to think about the stakeholders. Who do they need to involve in the communications activity? They'll be working through the channels. This is something that we discussed at the last meeting. We had some kind of feedback, is people wouldn't, and it's not really the job of a climate action officer to know what's the most effective channel to deliver different types of messages, but it's the comms team to work on that. Obviously, they'll work on the messaging, reputational risks. If they do a comms campaign, what are the potential risks of doing it? Are there kind of are there kind of reputational risks to the local authority, or is it going to be conflicting with other communications going out from the local authority, or are there issues around the timing about when the communications campaign should be done? And they will be then thinking about the measurement. Now, we have a slide, which we won't go through, but we have a slide on kind of measuring the impact of communications. But it's, as I said, I think it's really for the comms team to help you understand around how you would measure the kind of the effect of particular types of communications, and that's really a comms job rather than a climate action officer job. So I think that's quite important. And again, it's just this idea, they'll start to respond to, if you've sort of seen, for example, if you go to them and say, I was on a call and somebody was talking about climate cafes as a way to engage people, let them understand that and how they can then build communications around it. And it's those kind of ideas that, there's different ways of communicating. So we'll email these through after the call today. And as I said, they're editable, so you can just start to fill out. We're not expecting you to develop a full communications plan, but if you could start to get your ideas down and then reach out to your comms team, you can work with them to develop your communications activities for 2025. So this is just, again, I won't go through it now, but this is just a slide just to give you a sense of, from a communications perspective, if they're trying to understand and measure the impact, there's kind of set kind of things that they would want to know, like obviously engagement rate, or if you're asking people if you have a communications activity around applying for a grant, they'll be looking at, well, what was the conversion rate of how many messages went out to how many people versus, how many people actually signed up to the grant. Or there might be things like response times, so if you're asking people, you're communicating around an engagement exercise or a survey, they want to kind of communicate in a way that gets people to respond kind of quickly, so you get high response rates. Or they want to look at things like the sentiment, so what's the local press saying around what's happening with the local climate action plan, and is it kind of positive or negative? And again, I don't expect the climate teams to you don't need to, this isn't your job. This is the kind of the comms kind of job, but it's just for you to be aware of the kind of things that they wouldn't want to be, they need to be thinking about when they're sending out their communications. And there's obviously different methods. So like what we call A/B tests, all that means is you're testing different types of messages with the same audience to see what works. Then there's kind of looking at things like, you know, the obviously media sentiment analysis, you know, website traffic, etc., etc. Now, where the climate action plan kind of wants to get to, you can do your kind of measure the impact of the outputs, you know, when you do your, you know, your poster campaigns or your events, and, you know, you can measure all that together. But where the climate officers kind of want to get to is understanding what's the ultimate outcome in terms of us delivering, how has communications supported us delivering on our targets and our kind of climate action plan. And so this is where you would probably need to work with the comms officer to help them understand how do these activities actually contribute, the things that you're asking people to do, how will they contribute to overarching targets. But one of the things that we want to be very clear of, you need to be careful about attribution. It's never one single campaign or one single messaging or one single activity that contributes to emission reduction, and the messages that you're putting out go into that wider milieu of marketing communications that are happening across, you know, all media and all that kind of stuff. So you just need to be very careful, you know, and not put too much pressure on yourself to say that this communications campaign is going to lead to X% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, but just being clear that they all do contribute. And then it's thinking about over time. So one of the things that we had sort of said in the last webinar is you don't just do one-off activities and hope that works and then move on to the next one and try something different. It's taking that longer-term view, you know, that actually multiple activities and maybe building on communication campaigns, but it's not losing sight and making sure that you're effectively kind of keeping a record, and you're kind of looking at how the various campaigns that you've done through your climate action plan have built up over time. So I've gone through that very, very, very quickly. But as I said, there'll be some practical things that we'll send through to you after. Obviously, I'll get all the slides, but some of those kind of tools or worksheets, they're just in PowerPoint, they're editable. But we just think it will help you kind of reach out to your comms team and be able to articulate what you need in a way that would make sense to a comms person or communications team. Sorry, Joanne, I know I kind of jumped over that quite quickly, but is there anything that I missed in that we need to get across?
Yeah, that's all good. I think we covered what we discussed before, so that's all.
So I'm just going to hand you back to Kanya. Do you want to just obviously say thanks to and it's just great to see you all on the call. I wish we could do it in person, but so Kanya, do you want to hand back to you maybe just to I know I've gone over time again. My
No worries. We're 10 minutes over time, which is good because even I forgot to keep the time because the stories were so interesting and the examples everyone was, elaborating. They were really interesting to hear. So thank you everyone for this, for coming to this session, and thank you Simon and Joanna for crafting such a curating such a wonderful content. It is quality content, and I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure all the local authorities did too. It was quite engaging. As promised, we had promised that it would be much more engaging than the first session, and I hope that you enjoyed it as well. So if you have any comments or any feedback, please reach out to me, and I will send out all the slides, and Laura, I will edit out the content from the recording, so don't worry about that, and we can again touch base bilaterally as well. So just for all the updates of Own Your CCAP, you can look into our website, and also Own Your CCAP has their own website. It's Own Your CCAP. I'll just write it down in the chat box. And if you want to share your stories with me, I can also publish it on our social media and on our newsletter, on your CCAP newsletter, or even on the EU side of it, of things. So it would be very interesting for people around Ireland and also outside of Ireland in our consortium, the different partner countries, to share your stories. So they're very interesting. So I know that it will be interesting for everybody. So please reach out to me. Don't hesitate. And again, thank you so much for attending today's session. And Happy New Year again.
Thanks. Thanks everyone. Hopefully next time we'll get to meet in person. But thanks for your time today.